Senator Byer Suckoo, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Where do I begin? Madam President, there is so much that has been said in the last hour that needs to be clarified that I think the notes that I had for the structure of my wrap-up speech now have to be abandoned, because I've heard so much in the last hour that has no basis in fact at all. For the senator who just spoke to insist, after all that has been said over the last 2 days, that we are not doing well. Well, I know what happened. He wasn't here for all of yesterday. He hardly came here today. So he clearly did not hear the argument that was put. He clearly did not hear an explanation of the facts, and he clearly had no time to look at the estimates book. So he has no understanding. And then when he was here and Senator Boyce then was speaking, then he was busy doing something else. So he has not heard the facts that show quite clearly that Barbados is on a growth trajectory. Even though my colleagues took the pains to stand up on points of order repeatedly to point out to him that Barbados, by all these criteria that have been used, objective criteria, Barbados is continuing to do well. We have achieved growth. This ship is not sinking. This ship is afloat. This ship, as I ended my presentation by saying on Monday, this ship is afloat. This ship is sailing in the right direction. We just need a little more wind in our sails to get us moving a little faster, but we are definitely on course and we are definitely moving on. Now, where do I begin to address some of the things? First of all, he didn't understand the analogy about the child that is running off in the wrong direction. The point that was made was that even that child gets support from people in the sidelines. But you have people who are doing well, and we have an opposition that continues to stand up and berate the performance of this country. Even the child that is not doing well gets support of people on the sidelines. You watch the Olympics, even people who are not performing well get some support and some encouragement. But here is a country, here is a government that is pushing this country forward against all the odds. And what do we have, Madam President? We have an opposition that can only boo them on from the bleachers, Madam President. That was my point that I was making. But again, I think that is lost on this opposition party, Madam President. First of all, let me explain for the benefit of those who may now be confused having listened to the senator. The estimates process is not a rushed process. Nobody rushed to bring these estimates here in February. The estimates process begins every year in ministries by August, September. In August, the budget analyst, the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs sends out to the ministries, letting them know what the guidelines are as they present their as they prepare their estimates for the coming financial year. They also give them, where possible, where they have available ceilings. Or at the very least, they say this year, for example, don't go over what you spent last year. Or in good times, they may say, well, you know, at least try to keep it at that level, or we're going to give you a 10% up, or whatever. A figure a ballpark is given, and ministries start to sit down from September. My ministry is no different. From September, and I'm sure my colleagues in here will attest to this, you sit down from September, and you start to go through your priorities. You start to look at where you spent last year, what was allocated, what were you able to use, and then you adjust to suit for the coming year. If you had a program that you did not spend on, and you don't think that program is getting off the ground, then you don't put that back in the estimates, or you certainly don't put any more in the estimates. If you didn't spend because you had a slow start, but now you've got up to start, then you make that adjustment in the coming year. And then you sit down with your budget analysts, you sit down with your department heads, and then we go to sit with the Ministry of Finance and the Minister of Finance, the budget analysts, and all those people who are responsible for this document here. Every year that sit-down happens between December and January. This year, the process was also informed by a midterm review as well. They added, based on a financial statement, I think it was a 2016 or 17 statement that said we'll now be doing a midterm review as well, so that you can adjust mid-course the way you're spending. In fact, what has been happening is that the Ministry of Finance may say, all right, look, at this point, you probably need to shave off a little more of your expenditure and so on. So this year, we sat down in October with the ministry for the midterm review as well. So that helped to inform the process of these estimates. These estimates were ready since December, January. We sat down with the Ministry of Finance in December. By January, these estimates were done. This is not a rushed process. That we brought them here in February is because we know that this session is supposed to end by March. But this is, don't give the impression to the public that this is in any way a rushed process. This continuing propaganda and peddling fear. Let me just also point out, I did not want to stand on a point of order and dare risk giving the honourable member a little more time. So I said I would leave it till now. But just as Senator Ince informed and educated the senator that you don't see the word garbage trucks under sanitation service, let me also point out that under the Ministry of Transport and Works, there's nothing in there that says to buy buses. What it does say is provides for expenditure in connection with improvement of public transport. And there is an amount in there of $3 million, which is $1.5 million over what was there from the year before. It doesn't say the buses. So again, if we're doing our search, like you would search a document using Microsoft Word or whatever tool you have, you look for buses, you're not going to find the word buses. You have to know to read the estimates, and people who've been in this chamber for long enough need to understand the process of reading the estimates. Let me just recap, if I have, in the time that I have, Madam President. Yes, I said that we have to accentuate the positives. And forgive me if I quote music. The Bible says that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth will speak. And so I will quote music from time to time. I will quote love songs, and I will quote the Bible. These are the things that abound in my heart, and so I will, from the abundance of my heart, I will quote these things, and you will hear these things. So yes, I said we have to accentuate the positives. Senator Boyce, after having heard Senator Boyce, I didn't think there was going to be a need to come back and recap these positives, but clearly, after what we just heard, I need to just go over them again. The fact, as was said, that we have seen growth. And even the senator pointed out that, yes, there was 0.5% growth one year, 1.8% another year, 1.5% growth another year, and then is going to deny the fact that there has been growth. That, Madam President, is growth. By whichever way you look at it, upside down or however, there has been growth. Senator Boyce pointed out that there has been no runaway spending. Senator Boyce also pointed out, I've heard that Barbados is in the worst position ever. If I can repeat what Senator Boyce said, he made the point, for example, that the deficit this year, 17-18, was 3.7% of GDP, compared to 10 years ago, 2007-2008, when the deficit was 3.5% of GDP, roughly the same thing. And we didn't go berserk then, and there's no need to go berserk now. There's certainly no need to go bringing up pandemonium and peddling fear and trying to tell people that all is wrong in Barbados because our deficit is 3.7%. Madam President, we've also pointed to all the other things, all the other indicators. For example, the fact that the dependency on the borrowing from the central bank and the central bank printing money and borrowing from the national insurance, that all of those things have seen it now on a downward trajectory. All of these things we've pointed out. That we've maintained unemployment levels, Madam President. All of these things indicate that Barbados is not in any way sinking, that this ship is very much afloat and very much moving forward. But I didn't think it needed to be said because everybody in here said it on this side, and I thought perhaps the message had gotten through, but clearly not. Madam President, we have all spent a lot of time on the Barbados Sustainable Recovery Plan 2018, a plan which I, as the chair of the subcommittee of the social partners, had the opportunity to discuss with the social partners at meetings that we've had. And indeed, Madam President, although there may now be a backpedaling, those members of the social partnership were This was something that they wanted to see happen. They came to the table, and they ensured that we brought this to cabinet. It was explained, again, the process of government was explained, that this is something that the partners would work on, including high-level technocrats in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs, and then it would come to the cabinet. Cabinet members also make up the oversight, are included in the oversight committee. I know Senator McLean is a co-chair and Senator Boyce is another co-chair. Cabinet members are involved at the level of oversight along with members of the social partnership, Madam President. This is a document that they've worked on. In fact, I have been made to understand that one of the members of the social partnership actually said that this is a good document, this is the document that we need to follow, and we need a government with a mandate. But now that the Barbados Labour Party has indicated that they are not interested in this plan, apparently there is an effort now to distance oneself from the plan and the process that was involved in the preparation of this plan. Because this is the plan that the social partners, the employers, the business persons in the private sector, this is the plan that the trade unions and that the technocrats in the ministry worked on and brought to the Cabinet of Barbados, and the Cabinet approved it. That was the process, and the Cabinet approved it. So it had the buy-in at all levels. By the time they had said here, this is ready to go to the Cabinet, I would not have imagined it would have come to the Cabinet and that we would even have written forward for it if you did not think it was ready to come to that stage. In fact, as far as I recall, at social partnership meetings, they actually wanted the process hastened. They wanted us to get it to the Cabinet even faster. And now we have this document here before us. This is not a document of the Minister of Finance. Again, I'm hearing, oh, we've had so many plans. And I'm glad that my colleague Senator Ince addressed that we've had so many plans, and why is the Minister of Finance rushing to bring another one? This is not a Minister of Finance plan. This is endorsed by the Minister of Finance, indeed by all the Cabinet. But this is a plan that the social partners of Barbados have gotten together and worked on, identifying gaps and identifying priorities and charting a way forward and even timelines for how this plan can work. Let me also mention to members of the public through you, Madam President, that the copies of this plan are available online. You just have to Google the Barbados Sustainable Recovery Plan or go to the GIS website, gisbarbados.gov, I think it is .bb. Just Google GIS Barbados and you'll get GIS's website, and it is there so that all Barbadians can read for themselves what this is all about and what we have been talking about in here, Madam President. Because this is a plan that addresses our foreign exchange challenge, it addresses issues of growth, it addresses our productivity issues, and it looks at how we can actually achieve fiscal sustainability. Now let me just also add, because it bears saying, Madam President, that this plan builds on other plans. There have been a couple of other plans that have been brought to this chamber. This plan builds on those plans. Now, one would have to be foolhardy if one develops a plan for one's life, for one's family, for one's career, and you get to a roadblock and you decide, my plan is my plan and I'm going through. Remember what happened to the Titanic. When one has a plan and one gets to a blockage in the road, one has to adjust one's course, Madam President. It does not mean that one has failed. Your plan got you that far. You adjust your plan. Your new plan gets you further. And you know, Madam President, if you get to another roadblock, as we do sometimes on mornings, you get down the road and there is an accident, as very often there may be on the roads, you adjust your course. You take another plan. It doesn't mean that you took the wrong road to get to town. It just means that you had to adjust your course to get to your final destination. And that is what this plan is. There has not been a failed plan brought to this chamber or the other chamber, Madam President, in respect of Barbados's economic and social recovery. These plans have all brought us to this point where today we can celebrate growth, we can celebrate employment levels that are not sustainable, Madam President, but employment levels that we know are at least tolerable is the word I want, perhaps not, but we can celebrate the fact that we have not seen a rapid decline in our employment. And I always say that that is something that we need to celebrate also, because we know that if it was not for the Herculean effort of this government to keep people employed, against all the cries from every corner, local and overseas, to send home people, send home people, send home people, if we had caved into that pressure, we would certainly not be looking at employment figures at where they are right now. If we had caved in, Madam President, our unemployment would have been double what it is. We would have been in the 20-something range, Madam President. But we insisted that that was a priority for this government. And so we did everything else. Senator Boyce discussed with us quite painstakingly what the adjustments had to be when we lost the tax from the Canadian companies, and how we had choices to make, difficult choices. An easy choice may have been send home people, and so we will balance our budget because we will be able to make up the shortfall. Then we wouldn't have to be losing the 200 million, send home people, and we can balance that. But we knew that we could not do that. And so we made the tough choices to hold on to jobs, to invest in areas like tourism, so that today we can be celebrating growth in tourism. So that, as Senator Sandiford Garner pointed out yesterday, we can see those numbers, so that we can see all those planes on the tarmac there at the gates on Saturday afternoons when you go, sometimes as many as a dozen huge planes that we see lined up there. And you don't want to be anywhere inside the airport at that time, because there's so many people coming through the airport here in Barbados. We can celebrate that because we decided. This government sat down with the same plans that one may want to call failed, that the opposition would dare to call failed. We sat with those same plans and focused our priorities and said, we have to take care of our vulnerable. We have to make sure we have, that our children are protected. We have to make sure that we continue to bring money into this country through tourism. We have to make sure that we keep jobs, and certain other similar decisions this government made. We had to make difficult choices, and we made it, Madam President. And we ring-fenced things like health and education, defense and security, Madam President, and as I mentioned just now, our social services, while still doing other work to advance the society. The legislation that I outlined, as well as the infrastructure that we have done, doing those things to ensure that this country continues to move forward. I would like at this point, Madam President, to call on the private sector. The Minister of Finance did so also. We have a commitment, whether or not people want to use the word endorsement or commitment, Madam President. We do have a commitment. This government has certainly committed to working on this plan, because we do believe that this will get us to where, having identified these challenges and the way forward, it will get us to where we want to get to, Madam President. And we know the goals. I've outlined before the goals, Madam President, those goals being to reduce unemployment to at least 8%, Madam President, to also see us by to about 8% by 2020, to build comfortable net international reserves by 2020, to achieve fiscal sustainability through a balanced budget, also in that period, to accelerate real GDP growth to reach 3% by 2021, to establish a credible and sustainable debt management plan, and to enhance and safeguard the provisions for social development. Those are the objectives of the plan, Madam President. And once we adhere to this, it is our hope, and the Minister of Finance called on the private sector, and I believe Senator De Pisa also did so as well, called on the private sector that now we have a plan that we can all commit to. We hope that we would also be able to start off this private sector-led growth that I referred to in my opening presentation, Madam President, where the private sector would now step up and invest more in manufacturing, in creating jobs, in developing products for export, in contributing to funds and to sports and to philanthropic sports funds, cultural funds, and of course, yes, Senator Lady Haynes ensured that we got that plug in there for sports and culture and for other philanthropic exercises, Madam President, that the private sector will continue to will step up and contribute even more to those things in a real, tangible way. And to fund innovative products, including those new sectors, especially for those young people. We want the private sector to step up and fund projects. And I also, from the Ministry of Labor, would also ask that they step up with job placements and apprenticeship as well, because we often talk about the quality of the trained person not really being yet molded for the workplace. They have the training, they have the knowledge, but we need to get them into the workplace. And I want to encourage the private sector also to get in on that part of our development program as well. To that end, the Minister of Finance did say that we will adhere we propose certain strategic objectives during this time and for the government, and those include Barbados becoming a premier tourism destination of choice, offering world-class services to visitors, being a leading international business and financial services sector, producing high-quality and affordable agricultural produce for the domestic and export market, producing manufacturing products that are export competitive and ready. All of these things we will work with the private sector to do. To accelerate the development of the micro, small, and medium-sized businesses. Also, to indicate, I know Senator Watson did articulate again his concern for small businesses, but also to assure him that as I look through the growth framework, I do see that there are some things in there for that sector, including, it was interesting that he mentioned the procurement by school meal services and hospitals and so on to enter into an arrangement. And that is also, I see that specifically stated in our growth framework as well, to ensure that we empower those sectors. Also to work with the banking and financial industry to be the #1 shopping center in the region. Of course, to offer world-class telecommunications, something we haven't talked a lot about. We do have the Telecommunications Act on our order paper, and I'm sure we will talk more about it then. But Barbados provides in the region among the best telecommunications services. Our coverage, our data, we are among the best when it comes to telecommunications in the region. And that also will help to position us to be able to do all the things that we want to do in terms of international business, financial services, education, and everything else. Also, providing enhanced private social services along with what government provides, greater corporate social responsibility and philanthropy we want to see from our private sector, enhanced private-public sector collaboration, and of course enhanced renewable energy efficiency. These are the things that the government will hope that we can work with the private sector to have become a reality for us in Barbados, Madam President. And so there are so many positives, Madam President. I make no apology for insisting and for my colleagues insisting that there are so many positives that we as a people need to hold on to. We do need to accentuate these positives, Madam President. It is so important, not only for it's not about the Democratic Labour Party, and it's not about elections, Madam President. It's about Barbadians being a people who have pride in who we are. Our very motto speaks to pride and industry. And how can one have pride in oneself when somebody is always telling you that you are not good enough, that you are the worst that there is? You cannot engender pride in such an environment. And it is important for our people, and it is important for our young people, that they understand that the country that they are living in, that where they have been planted is fertile soil for them to grow. And we, as responsible citizens, and certainly as a responsible government, will make sure that we tend to these young plants, our youth, planted in this soil, so that they can grow and that they can flourish. But if we continue to tell our young people that Barbados is the worst place on earth, Madam President, then it is no wonder they will want to take up and go elsewhere, and I'm sure they will do that only to realize that, you know what? Where they were in Barbados was probably a better place for them. Because so many of them take up and leave thinking that they're going to lands of opportunity and realizing that that is not really the case. But that anywhere they go, they have to work hard in order to achieve. And that if they're prepared to do it here, we are prepared to create an environment that hard work will not go a begging, Madam President. And so we are working to ensure that that can happen. And yes, we have to eliminate the negatives. I said it before, and I will say it again. We have to ensure that we keep our eyes on the goal, Madam President. Now, I just want to make one observation. I have heard the respondent from the opposition, Madam President, the Honorable Senator, when he spoke, he referred to lies, Madam President, lies that were being told by this administration because of promises that were made in 2013 of January that were then broken by January of 2014, and he referred specifically to the situation with the jobs, Madam President, and certain things that had to be articulated. I believe it was the November 2013 budget. And I've heard this propaganda, Madam President, about all these lies that were told. Madam President, I keep in my phone a photograph, a snapshot really, of a screenshot of the central bank, a central bank report that showed, it's a graph that imposes several years of the foreign exchange reserves of this country. Madam President, it shows 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, and so on. Madam President, and I show this graph to persons who may want to have the same discussion with me in my constituency about why government had to make these decisions in 2013, 2014 that seemed to be contrary to what they had said, what we had said in 2000, at the beginning of 2013. Madam President, that graph shows, and it's a pity I can't show it here, that graph shows that 2011 and 2012 followed the similar path that you've seen every year. And 2013 started out just like 2011 and 2012. And then from April, if you look at that graph, I have it right here on my phone, there was a drop that went right down to about November, December that year. The foreign exchange reserve dropped. Now, I do not have the facts that I could stand here and speak to what occasioned that drop and where that foreign exchange went. But what I know is that the facts that we had to deal with was a drop in the foreign exchange, Madam President. That meant that we had, again, to adjust course. Madam President, as I have said to constituents of St. George South, Madam President, I do recall my mother promising me a trip. In fact, I recall my mother promising me a chopper bicycle for Christmas. I still remember it well, and every time I see a red chopper bicycle, I still remember I was about 8 or 9 years old. And I still remember just 2 weeks ago I saw a fellow with a red chopper bicycle, and I remembered. I never got it, because I remember my parents sitting me down and telling me, Esther, we promised you that if you did well this year, you would get this red chopper. We have the money, here is the money. But we are building the house, and this has to happen, and it has to happen by such and such a date. And we need to take this money and put into the house. In other words, the facts changed. My parents, I couldn't argue with my parents. First of all, I could throw a fit if I wanted, but we know where that would end. But the fact is, I didn't get that chopper bicycle. Why? Because my parents told me a lie when they promised me that bicycle? I don't believe my parents lied to me. My parents were genuine based on the facts they had with them at the time that I was going to be able to get that chopper bicycle. But the facts changed, and that money had to be spent elsewhere. And so I did not get the chopper, but we got the house, Madam President. The house, they were able to do that with the house, and we were able to move into the house. And so, Madam President, this is what happened in 2013. The facts changed. I have the graph from the Central Bank of Barbados that showed 2011, 2012, 2013 dip. Starting in April 2013, it dipped. And so we had to adjust course. And when it continued, the minister, they adjusted things in the ministry, we did all kinds of things, we made cuts and so on, and it continued to dip. And so at December 2013, a decision had to be made that included cuts across the board. It included cuts that affected almost everybody, including the decision to send home some workers. and we sat and we worked with the social partners again on how we can do this. In fact, first thing we sat to do is how we could avoid doing it, because it was nothing that anybody wanted to do. How could we avoid sending home people? And to their credit, the unions, the labor movement gave us a list of things that we could do. But we examined all of them and realized that either those things could not be done in enough time to be able to bring us to where we had to be. It would take years, it would take legislation, these kinds of measures that they had introduced, or they weren't practicable, or they just would not yield the amount of money that we wanted to yield. So having looked at all the options that the social partners put on the table, we then had to say, you know what? We have to do this. We have to send home workers. And so we chose the minimum amount. There were all kinds of figures on the table. 6,000, 8,000, 10,000, send home all kinds of people. And we chose the barest number. We worked it so that the barest number that could go. And we tried to ensure that we didn't send home people, two from the same household, wherever that could be avoided or wherever we were aware of that. Things like that you tried to avoid, because we were also mindful that this would also occasion hardship for many people. So we tried to do it. It was a difficult choice to make, Madam President, and I could speak to it because I was one of the persons sitting around the table with the social partners as we looked at these options. It was a very difficult time for all of us, but the facts occasioned that. It wasn't that we came to this country and we said, knowing the facts, we came and we lied to the country. When we came to the country with the figures on the economy, those were the figures that we had, those were the figures that the central bank presented. Of April 2013, you could see that dip, and that was where everything had to change. And so this country had to go through a very difficult period, but a period that I think that I'm glad to say the Democratic Labour Party was at the helm to negotiate us through. Because I believe that it is with our management, Madam President, that we have been able to come through those waters, and that we've been able to get to this point where we are on course. And as I said, Madam President, if I can repeat the analogy, we need to just continue. We need more wind in our sails now. We need the speed to get us going. But we also are mindful that these things will take time. And that's why we've set targets of 2020 and 2021. Now, the Barbados Labour Party may have problems with us bringing something that indicates that we intend to work this plan through to 2021. Yes, we do intend to work this plan through to 2021, and we do expect that the country will realize that we are the country that has the moral authority to work this plan through to 2021. In fact, the Barbados Labour Party wants nothing to do with this plan, a plan that was devised by the social partners and the technocrats in ministries. And they want nothing to do with this plan. So, and they haven't articulated another plan. So I don't know on what basis they expect the country will have anything to do with it, Madam President. In fact, you know, Madam President, I've mentioned the positives that we need to accentuate. But while we're at it, I mentioned that we have to accentuate negatives. And I'm going to go there again. I don't care who has a problem with it. I'm going to go there again. We need to accentuate, we need to eliminate the negatives. And you know, one of the things we need to eliminate, that we've been able to eliminate and we don't want to see back here, is the wastage that this country went through for the 14 years prior to 2008. Now that's a negative that Barbadians eliminated, and we want to continue to eliminate that. The squandermania, the reckless spending that we saw under the last administration, Madam President, not accounting for debt. I was still trying to add up all the figures there that we had to bring to book when we came to office, Madam President. We had to bring to book almost $2 billion and seek a guarantee for that amount of money, Madam President. For more than $1 billion, we had to seek a guarantee for debt, most of it incurred by the Barbados Labour Party. And then to sit here this week and understand that we don't even know the terms and conditions of perhaps the prison. So, you know, it's still crawling out of the woodwork. Now, that is not the kind of reckless spending that we, in fact, with those, you can't, well, first we didn't know if it was U.S. or Barbados currency we were dealing with. You remember that? We weren't sure if the amount was U.S. or Barbados. Then we weren't sure about the actual amount. Now we're not sure the terms. Was it a bullet? Was it not a bullet? Where, how? They can't find the lease. It never came to this parliament. At least we can't find evidence that it came to this parliament. Where this is not the kind of thing that we want to have back. Oh, the same thing with the highway. This is what punctuated the last administration. And you think that that could have happened in this administration while we went through and still come out of what we have come through the last 10 years? No, 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 no. This is why the Democratic Labour Party had to be in office. Because if they were in office continuing with this kind of thing, Barbados would really have sunk. But we have been able to stay afloat. And it looks like we thought we've cleaned up the mess that they've left behind, but based on what we're hearing now with the prison, there may still be more that we have to clean up as well. Who knows where this will all end, Madam President? So we have to eliminate this approach to governance and this approach to politics that accompanies it, where just anything will go. You will say anything, you will do anything if you think you can score a few political points. You will try to make out to the rest of the world that Barbados is so bad. You know, I've been speaking, it amazes me how often I speak to visitors, Madam President, people who come to this country from Trinidad and they come here very guardedly because they've heard, oh, you're in trouble down there. And when they get here and they look around, they say, this is not what I expected at all. People who come from Guyana, they come from Jamaica, they hear things bad, boy, things bad in Barbados. And when they get here, they look around and they say, huh? You know, we have been able to maintain our dignity, and the Barbados Labour Party doesn't seem to want us to even walk away with our dignity. We have been able to maintain our dignity, to keep our pride in who we are and in what we've accomplished. We have challenges, and there's no denying that. But I don't know that there's any good, justifiable reason, Madam President, to make Barbadians feel that they are the worst thing out and that Barbados is the worst thing out. These estimates, I don't think my colleague on the other side understands the estimates. Otherwise, he would have understood where the discussion that we've had for the last 3 days was centered. But these estimates show that this country has made progress and is poised to continue making progress, even though you don't find words like buses and garbage trucks and those things in there. All of that is in here. All of that is in here, Madam President. And so we have to continue doing this. What Barbados has going for it, Madam President, is good governance. There you go. Well, exactly. That's right. Well, you look for it and tell me, because and the thing is, you know, you wouldn't even know if everything you have in here for the prisons is the right amount, not at the rate they're going. You know, what we have going for us, Madam President, is a people who are, Senator Husband said it, we have a trainable, intelligent people. We have, Madam President, an industrious people, a people who are proud of Barbados and prepared to do what they have to do to make Barbados work, Madam President. And we have leadership in this country, Madam President. We have leadership in this country that is trustworthy, something that we can boast on this side. Leadership that is trustworthy, leadership that maintains stability, leadership that does not sow seeds of discord even within its own camp, Madam President. That is what we have on our side. We have leadership that continues to inspire unity both within the cabinet, within the party, and within this country. That is what we have going for us. And so it has gotten us this far. And if it has been working for us, Madam President, we will continue to work for it. And finally, Madam President, yes, you clap for that. You clap for that. But how much time do I have left? I know. How much time do you have? Okay. Good. Right. So I still have 21 minutes. So all who are tired sitting in here and need to leave can leave now. And Madam President, so yes, we have positives that we need to continue to remind Barbadians of, lest they forget. Positives that it does not benefit the other side to let people know and to remind people of, and so they will do anything. Talk about propaganda. They had the gall to come in here today and talk about propaganda from the Democratic Labour Party, when all the propaganda I've been seeing is this fear-mongering and this telling people that, you know, Barbados is no good. No. We will continue to accentuate the positives. We will eliminate the negatives. We know the things in our governance structure that have been causing challenges. We have spoken to the issues of productivity. We have spoken, Madam President, to issues with implementation. We've spoken to how we have to bring our deficit down, or how we have to bring our reserves down. We will continue to eliminate the negatives, Madam President. We will continue to accentuate the positives. And we will continue, Madam President, to latch on to the affirmatives. Finally, we will continue to latch on to the affirmatives. As I mentioned, good governance. We will continue to affirm the good governance that this country has seen in the last 10 years, so that we don't have any surprise loans jumping out of the books at us. We don't have any surprise terms and conditions jumping out at us. We can say clearly what we have spent the money on, and we can justify, Madam President, why we have spent every cent that you have seen in these estimates and in the 11 estimates that we have brought to this chamber. We can justify every cent that you've seen in there, even in difficult times, because we knew that that money was meant to allow Barbados to continue to stay afloat and then to grow, Madam President. And what we can also boast, Madam President, is that we don't have the cost overruns. We bring projects here, Madam President, and yes, finally, as in I'm in the last third of my hour. Yes, Kadir, poor you. And you're not accustomed sitting in this chamber, don't worry, you won't be here much longer. Yes, Madam President, we have colleagues who are very, very antsy to leave, Madam President, so I was just trying to enlighten them that, we still have a few more minutes to go. So we will affirm the fact, Madam President, that Barbadians have been doing the right things, that this government has been doing the right thing by Barbadians, Madam President, and then we will affirm for this country 3 things I want them to take away from all that we've heard, Madam President, over the last 3 days. I want Barbadians to know that, 1, there continues to be help for the vulnerable, Madam President. It continues to be a priority, help for the vulnerable. It was highlighted, and I will just make reference to it again. There will continue to be, and we place emphasis on hope for the youth, Madam President. And as we have seen clearly articulated, except for those who wouldn't put on the glasses, we have seen, Madam President, a headway for this economy, Madam President. So we will continue to affirm that there is help for the vulnerable, hope for our youth, and a headway for our economy, Madam President. That is just so that some people could at least remember to take it home with them. Alliteration, just to help him remember. Madam President, so we have heard about the welfare system and the things that are being provided. We've heard, Madam President, that there may have to be the means testing. I know that means testing has been looked at and it has posed a challenge from time to time, but we want to ensure that as much as possible you have efficiency in the distribution of the social services. So that is going to be explored. We have the National Assistance Board, we have the Child Care Board, we have the National Disabilities Unit, we have the Poverty Alleviation, Madam President, the whole Community Development Department, my ministry with the Employment Services, Madam President, are part and parcel of the Strengthening Human and Social Development Project to ensure that persons not only get a handout, Madam President, but that they are set on a path for their own recovery through employment and the creation of jobs. Madam President, this document that we have spoken to, the Barbados Sustainable Recovery Plan, Madam President, my colleague Senator Garner spoke to several of the projects in tourism. But Madam President, I just want to mention again, from the point of view of help for the vulnerable, and even hope for our young people, Madam President, that we have in here projects. She mentioned some of them. Sandy Bay, the Sands, that is supposed to be ongoing. The actual construction is ongoing. Sandals Royal, Wyndham's Sandlord's Castle, Hyatt Centric Hotel, Sandals Beaches, South Gap Sea Breeze Hotel. These were some that were mentioned. Accra Miami Beach Development, the three Roystone Limited, Bay Street Development, Madam President. But you know what jumps out at me, Madam President? Yes, there's investment, but these speak to the creation of approximately 4 job opportunities during the construction phase, Madam President. And then each one of these will bring with them permanent jobs after the construction, some more than others given the size of the operations. But each one of these, Madam President, speaks to jobs. This is hope for the vulnerable, help for the vulnerable, Madam President. Madam President, in terms of hope for our youth, building on what Senator Husbands spoke to about the education and training, I want to take 2 minutes to congratulate the Ministry of Labor, Social Security and Human Resources and Human Resource Development and all those other ministries that worked with us in the implementation of the Human Resource Development Strategy. I'll tell you the first reason why I want to highlight it. We have spoken so much about implementation deficit, Madam President. That Human Resource Development Strategy was funded by the European Union to the tune of 50 million euro, and there was 100% implementation of that project. You know what that means? All 50 million euros came into the coffers of this country. So when people talk about the implementation deficit, I need to pat my ministry and those other agencies that worked with us on the back, because it shows that there was the biggest project last year and year before. This was the biggest project in any of the government agencies. Right now it's winding down. But 50 million euros, and we had 100% implementation of that project, Madam President. So it is a success that we can build on, and we can then encourage other ministries and agencies that we can implement all the other projects that will bring in foreign exchange. If we continue to hear the negatives that Barbados has an implementation deficit disorder, and people continue to drill that in your head, then you will not achieve it. It can be done, it has been done, and we will continue to implement our projects, Madam President. And so, as I bring this under the umbrella of hope for our young people, I also want to point out that under this Human Resource Development Strategy, Madam President, what we looked at was creating an enabling environment, Madam President, for young people to be able to achieve their goals. Also, we looked at the structures that were involved. We looked at a knowledge management system in government. We looked at a national qualifications framework, and Senator Husband spoke to CVQs and NVQs and those things that make you more employable, and that also portable, that you can take them with you and go elsewhere and say, look, I'm certified, Madam President. And those were some of the things that we did. We actually did quite a lot under this project. But Madam President, I just want to highlight, we spoke about productivity. Under that project, we started work on an e-government master plan. That master plan was completed in December of 2016 and will lead to better public service management, so that we could provide better services to the private sector, Madam President, and to citizens. You know, we're talking about doing business and facilitating business. Well, this e-government master plan is a part of that, and implementation actually commenced in this 2017-18 financial year. We also, one of the other highlights that I mentioned, and I saw it on television just this week as well, as they showed some of the pillars from the Human Resource Development Strategy, was our youth agripreneurship program. We worked with the Ministry of Agriculture. We created an NVQ in agripreneurship, Madam President. So these students who may not have even achieved certificates in school came out of this program with an NVQ. And we had our partners on board. Nature Care was mentioned, and we had several other partners. What was also developed in there, and I want to mention this, was an online forum to market local agricultural produce, a market information system to provide up-to-date market prices and trends, and a farmers information system portal, all geared to enhance agriculture, Madam President. And I mention these because we have young people who are keen on getting involved in agriculture, and they need to know that government is putting some resources in ensuring that agriculture can provide a sustainable livelihood for them. And we have been doing that. The Ministry of Agriculture is doing it, and also now I mention here through the Ministry of Labor and the Human Resource Development Strategy that we've been doing that. And we've also been working with the Small Business Association to upgrade their training facilities. We even helped that Small Business Association with an NVQ in janitorial services level 2. So So again, persons who never achieved a certificate at school now have an NVQ, and they're keen to go again and get another one, Madam President. And so this is how we are bringing hope to young people, Madam President. We are showing, we are encouraging them. We've heard all the things in education, and time does not permit me to go over them again, nor do I need to, Madam President. But we are ensuring that their education system will serve them well. We are ensuring, I mentioned before, but I need to put it in this context, that labor market information is available to our young people so that they know what the careers are out there that they should be training for. So they're not all going to train to be psychologists and then realize, oops, the country doesn't need so many psychologists, but to understand where the gaps are, and where the niches are, and where they should then pitch themselves, and what suits them, and where they can actually try to make a life for themselves, Madam President. So we've been working in tourism, in agriculture, and with the small businesses, and all of that is articulated in this same plan for how we are going to roll this out, Madam President. Again, it bears saying, these are not new ideas. We have just looked at them and made them priorities. These are things that have been articulated in earlier financial statements, Madam President. They're there in other plans also. For example, small business, we've already rolled out a micro, small, and medium enterprises policy. So we've already started the work on some of these things. So we're just fast-tracking them, if you will, Madam President, because we realize that they represent key areas that can help us to achieve, the level of growth that we want. Also, Madam President, I just wanted to put a plug in here. I know that a lot has been said about parenting, especially in the context of our concern for the youth. And as I mentioned hope for our young people, Madam President, I do want to say that I know that the Ministry of Social Care, they do have in their estimates some work for parenting support, but their challenge seems to be, as I read the estimates, building the partnerships. But they have been out there doing train-the-trainer programs, and they're looking at developing parenting centers as well, Madam President, areas for these skills to be taught, and that they can partner with others to ensure that they impart the skills so that parents who feel overwhelmed, parents who know that they can do better but they're not sure how, can have somewhere that they can go. And even if not at that point to be told exactly what it is, to be directed to someone who can help. And that, Madam President, certainly is one way the government can help, but I maintain at this point that that is not the sole responsibility of a government. That responsibility has to be the responsibility of every single one of us. We each have to make sure that we hold the hand of a single parent or a parent. It doesn't have to be single because they're married parents, Madam President, who are struggling just as well. But that where we can, where we know them, reach out and help them. It doesn't cost you anything, just have a chat, be somebody they can talk to, lend advice. Offer to look after the children when you see that they're pulling their hair out and they don't know what to do. Give them an evening off and say, here, I'll watch the children for an afternoon so you can maintain your sanity. Having had 3 children, I know what it is to be near the point that you feel you're going to lose your sanity sometimes when the children all start. And I know persons in here, not Senator Todd, you are yet to discover, but there are persons in here who are parents who understand that sometimes all you need is somebody to say, go enjoy your evening. I will watch the children for a little bit. So however we can provide that support, we need to provide that support, Madam President, because it can make the difference in what a parent can invest into the lives of their children and ultimately make a difference to that generation and ultimately the future of Barbados. So there is hope on the horizon for our young people. And finally, Madam President, as I said, headway for our economy. Just to go through it again would be to repeat what all my colleagues have said for several times already, Madam President, but to reiterate just this, that we are on course, we are on track. This ship is not sinking. The oil pressure isn't reading low. Madam President, this ship is on course, on track. We have a captain at the helm who knows what he's doing, Madam President. And, Madam President, I maintain, and my colleagues have supported me in this, that we are just at the position now that all we need is a little more wind in the sails. That's all we need, a little more wind in the sails. We will get there, you know. Even at this pace, we will get there. We wouldn't get there fast enough, but we will get there with a little more wind in our sails. We will get there, Madam President. And so, Madam President, I encourage Barbadians, hold on to these affirmatives. Hold on to these affirmatives. These estimates represent help for our vulnerable population. They represent hope for our youth. They represent headway for our economy. Madam President, let us latch on to the affirmatives, accentuate the positives, eliminate the negatives. Madam President, all we need is a little wind in the sails. And I want to thank Barbadians who've stood behind us. You know the song, if I dare quote another song, Madam President, at the risk of provoking the ire of the they've left. They wouldn't hear. But Madam, you know the song that says, "You are the wind beneath my wings," Madam President? I want to thank Barbadians for being the wind in the sails. I want to thank Barbadians for continuing to uphold us with their prayers, with their support, Madam President. It is only the opposition that comes in here and tries to pull down Barbados. But when I am out and about in every neck of the woods, Madam President, the support that I get from Barbadians is encouraging. They tell me, "I'm praying for you, I'm praying for your country, I'm praying for the government," and I just say, "Keep on praying, thank you for your prayers." And I want to thank Barbadians. It is their prayers, their love, and their support, Madam President, that have kept us going, that have prevented us, Madam President, from throwing our hands up and saying, "You know what, we can't do this." It is them who have encouraged us, that has shown us that you are on the right track. Keep going, we are with you. And Madam President, they have brought us this far. And the wind in our sails that we need, Madam President, is all of us together. I said it before. Our social partners, Madam President, they've come on board. But it is the people of Barbados, to a man, Madam President. They represent the wind in our sails as we take this very much afloat and very much intact ship, Madam President, to the port, Madam President, of greater success, of sustainable recovery, Madam President, and of self-actualization for every single Barbadian. With that, Madam President, I am obliged, and I do beg to move that this, being a money bill, do now pass.